I always say that transformation at a single site school is literally on the shoulders of that building leader and making sure that building leader is ready to be a generalist in all areas of those system change guiding principles.
This is the Education Crisis, what it is and how to fix it. I'm your host, Tembi Duncan. This series features renowned education expert Dr. Charles Reigeluth, author of the book Vision and Action, Reinventing Schools Through Personalized, Competency-Based Education. Together, we examine the crisis in American education. What has caused the crisis? What our schools need to be like to fix the crisis? How to successfully transform to that very different kind of school, and what you can do to help your schools to transform. Chapter 9. How can a school transform to a learner-centered culture? Dr. Reigeluth, in previous chapters, you introduced us to continuous progress, where students move forward based on mastery rather than a set amount of time spent on a subject. You talked about how the roles of teachers, parents, communities, and technology should shift away from the teacher-centered model and toward a model of student autonomy and empowerment. Curricula should be adjusted to highlight an interdisciplinary approach to teaching relevant content that educates the whole child in core areas while nurturing each student's unique interests and strengths. You and your co-author of Vision and Action, Dr. Jennifer Carnop, explored the major shift in school and classroom culture that all these other changes require. You emphasized that each school should restructure into small teacher-led schools in each school building, and that they should have choice-based accountability, whereby money follows students to the school of their choice, and the district should play a supportive role rather than a controlling one. All of this sets up a vision of a school system that meets the needs of all community stakeholders. You offered guidance for how districts can transform to this new educational paradigm, guidance in the form of fundamental principles, sequential activities, and continuous activities. You also mentioned that transformation is possible for a standalone school that's not part of a district, like a private school or charter school. What kind of guidance would these standalone schools need in order to make the shift?
Well, the fundamental principles for shifting the paradigm are the same, so let's begin with those. Focus on helping stakeholders evolve their mindsets about what a school should be like. Most of us are only familiar with the industrial age model, and it's really hard for people to imagine schools being fundamentally different. Involve as many stakeholders in the transformation process as possible so more mindsets change. This buy-in will prove helpful throughout the transformation process, helping to reduce resistance and sabotage of the changes. Understand that the transformation process is a learning process, and decisions should be made through organized consensus building.
Okay, this makes sense, but I can imagine that building consensus among many stakeholders would be really complicated and time-consuming. Should there be a leader to direct the process?
I can see why you might think that a leader is necessary to direct this process, because we're used to seeing principals and other administrators leading schools in the current paradigm. Actually, leadership for the transformation process should be of the transformational leadership style, which operates by developing a shared vision and then empowering everyone to be leaders in pursuing that vision and facilitating communication and collaboration.
I see. So if everyone has a voice in establishing the vision, then everyone will have a stake in the outcome.
Exactly. The transformation process should begin by reaching consensus on values about education so that the stakeholders have a baseline for judging all the decisions about what the transformed school will be like. Other principles relate to building readiness for transformation by developing a culture of change-minded stakeholders and seeking political support. Again, these fundamental principles apply to school districts and standalone schools.
And what principles apply specifically to standalone schools that want to transform?
The biggest difference for a standalone school is in the sequential activities. With a single school, you're working at a smaller scale, so there are fewer stakeholders and less bureaucracy. The key is to make sure that the school community is ready for change and that readiness criteria are pretty similar to what you'd need for an entire school district.
So readiness is key. What does that look like?
Well, the most important aspect of readiness is trust. There has to be a solid sense of trust among all the stakeholders, the board, the administrators, teachers, other staff, parents, and even students. If trust is weak, that's the first thing the school community must address before beginning their transformation.
Yeah, without trust, people probably won't be open to change.
Right, they won't. And they also need political support from the board and principal. That's a lot easier than getting political support in a school district where there are far more stakeholders to deal with.
But I remember you mentioning a different leadership style.
Yes, the transformational leadership style, which does away with the principal do right and command and control style of leadership. And for all of this to work, there must be resources for the transformation. Change takes time, especially when you're asking a school community to shift their entire mindsets around what a school should be like. Educators and parents don't have much time to spare, so resources are necessary to literally buy their time so they can participate in working sessions during the summer, holiday breaks, and on weekends.
That's an incredible concept. I don't think we always consider the fact that time itself is a resource and it has monetary value.
That's right. And it's not just about money, because you also need the right expertise in place to guide the transformation process. Similar to district level transformation, we recommend that this facilitator be from outside the school, because the facilitator must be viewed by all as neutral, no favoritism. And this person should not be viewed as a consultant there to solve the problem for the district. Rather, this person should be competent in helping the stakeholders to solve their own problem, to design their own new school. In our book, Vision in Action, we offer criteria for selecting a good facilitator. And over the past 10 or 20 years, many nonprofit groups have arisen to provide competent facilitation. We identify some of them in our book. Another criterion for readiness is the school's history with change. If stakeholders are exhausted from frequent reform efforts, or if there have recently been some failed reform efforts, the stakeholders will likely have a bad attitude toward participating in the transformation process. These are some of the most important criteria, and I'd like to emphasize they're like a chain. So if there's a weak link, the whole chain breaks.
For transforming a whole district, you mentioned in the previous chapter of this series that it was important to form a pre-launch team. Is that also important for transforming a standalone school?
Yes, that's a central part of preparing for transformation in a standalone school. The pre-launch team is made up of an influential leader from each stakeholder group, a board member, principal, teacher, other staff, and a parent. The pre-launch team does not attempt to formulate a vision of their learner-centered school. Its purpose is to develop a team culture and capacity for transformation so that when the team expands to the leadership team, which is typically about 12 to 20 influential people from all stakeholder groups, it can preserve that culture and build the capacity of the leadership team. The pre-launch team can also improve school readiness, conduct a political and community analysis, develop school board culture and understanding of transformation, and secure external and internal funding, among other things.
Okay, so the pre-launch team forms a leadership team after it's developed a good culture and understanding for the transformation process. What comes next in the sequential activities?
The leadership team begins to create a shared vision of what they think an ideal school would be for their students and community. It's very important for them to start by thinking in the ideal, a principle I mentioned earlier, and to later compromise as necessary to implement it. And they should continue to evolve their school closer to that ideal over time, what systems thinkers call the emergent approach to system design. The leadership team starts this ideal design process by reaching consensus on the values that the system should reflect. And as it makes design decisions, the team constantly reviews how well the decisions align with those values.
And they should be making these decisions by consensus.
Correct. The ideal design process is a consensus building process and a learning process. It doesn't operate by majority rule because that creates winners and losers, which can result in sabotage of the effort. The learning process helps team members evolve their mental models or mindsets about education, But it's important for the leadership team to share what they're learning with members of their stakeholder groups who aren't on the leadership team, so as to build broad understanding and support of the new design. Community conferences can also help to build ownership of the vision. This vision-building process needs to be strongly guided by the fundamental principles I mentioned earlier.
Okay, so once the leadership team has developed the ideal vision, what should happen next?
Well, the entire school community needs an opportunity to revise and endorse this new vision. Broad endorsement is key to preventing resistance and even sabotage of the transformation. That's why stakeholders need to be allowed to offer revision.
It makes sense that the process should allow everyone involved to be heard and have their ideas included in the new vision for the school.
Absolutely. This builds ownership and commitment. Then the leadership team develops a strategic plan to transform the school as close as possible to the ideal vision. One strategy here is to start with one or more of the lowest grade levels in the school and expand to one higher grade level per year as the students move up.
Okay, I've seen many charter schools begin their entire school model with one grade level and build out from there. So that's familiar. It seems like stakeholders could grasp this concept pretty easily if it's applied to a new educational paradigm.
That's a great way to draw a connection. In Chapter 7, we talked about the importance of small school size. It's much easier to create a culture of caring and strong relationships in a small school. And it's easier for teachers to run their own school if the number of teachers does not exceed about 10. So, if the standalone school is large, say more than about 15 teachers, another strategy is to ask about 7 to 10 teachers to volunteer to create a separate school within the building. This separate school would be administratively independent from the traditional school in the building, and the volunteers would serve as trailblazers of the new model, experimenting and course correcting while the other teachers observe and take note of the way forward. This avoids creating an us versus them attitude of competition between the two schools in the building. And the two schools can share many resources in the building, like cafeteria, gym, library, and so forth. Now, there are several other strategies we talk about in our book, Vision and Action. But whatever strategy is chosen by the leadership team, it's essential to create a separate administrative structure along the lines of what we discussed in Chapter 7. Many small schools that have transformed do not have a principal, and the teachers run their school.
Oh, wow. That seems like a really empowering shift for everybody, especially the teachers.
It really is. But the leadership team must also secure funding and other resources to make the strategic plan work.
So an ideal vision and a strategy and resources for getting as close as possible to it. That makes so much sense. So I imagine the next step is to carry out that strategic plan. And you've detailed the fundamental principles and sequential activities. But what about continuous activities?
Yeah, they're very much the same as for transforming a whole school district. Building trust, sustaining motivation for change, establishing strong lines of communication are really essential to a successful transformation process. A spirit of collaboration with constant reflection and evaluation leads to an environment of learning where stakeholders continuously evolve their mindsets toward effective systems thinking, group process, and team building. Participants should be encouraged to share their personal beliefs, assumptions, and mindsets. This helps maintain a sense of community and fosters organizational learning and memory. Other continuous activities include developing and sustaining skills in transformational leadership, sometimes called servant leadership, and securing necessary resources to support the transformation process.
All right, so we've covered all the bases with the fundamental principles, sequential activities, and continuous activities. Now, if I wanted to get my standalone school started on this road to transformation, what is the first thing I need to do?
Well, start by preparing. Learn more about the new paradigm of education and visit or study a standalone school or two that has transformed. Then reach out to influential people in your school and try to get them excited about it and help them learn about it. Together, you can begin to assess the school's readiness and take steps to improve that readiness. You can find a lot of guidance for this in my book, Vision in Action, but you shouldn't go it alone. I strongly recommend you reach out to a nonprofit organization that specializes in helping schools to transform. We list some of those organizations in the book.
Well, folks, we've thoroughly covered what schools can do to transform. And in the second half of this chapter, we'll hear from some folks in two nonprofit organizations that have helped schools and districts to transform. Then in chapter 10, the final chapter in this series, we'll focus on what individual community members can do to make this transformation possible. But first, it's important to understand that well over 1,000 schools have already transformed to the personalized, competency-based paradigm with impressive results and are great sites for people to visit for ideas and advice. They include the Chugach School District in Alaska, the Lindsay Unified School District in California, Da Vinci Schools, Summit Public Schools, Met High School, Valor Collegiate Academies, Montessori Schools, Minnesota New Country School, and Redbridge School, to name a few. There are also many nonprofit organizations that help schools and districts to transform, such as Two Revolutions, Education Elements, Education Reimagined, Reinventing Schools Coalition, Summit Learning, Transcend Education, and Leap Innovations, among others. Many of these schools and service organizations are listed in the Vision and Action book. Finally, according to the Aurora Institute and the KnowledgeWorks Foundation, all but 5 states in the U.S. allow learners to progress toward graduation through demonstrations of competency. Transformation is not pie in the sky. It's being done successfully all over the U.S. So now let's hear from some folks in 2 nonprofit organizations that have helped schools to transform. Here's what they had to say about the process of transforming an individual school. We spoke with Scott Fronheim at Leap Innovations, a Chicago-based nonprofit that helps schools and districts transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education. Scott, what does Leap Innovations do to help an independent school to transform? A school that's not part of a district or a top-down charter system.
So we've done some single site work with either rural single sites or some charter networks that are single site charters. And it's interesting to see the differences between the readiness or the speed or the urgency of which a single site can go. And then we also remember that the single site may not have a lot of access to infrastructure and may need to build a lot of that infrastructure through the change management process. So I think double-edged sword there, where sometimes you can get so excited about going fast because of less bureaucracy or less district decision-making or stakeholder engagement. And then you recognize the lack of potential infrastructure on the digital ecosystem, on the access to technology, on the policies in place to be able to support some of the transformation.
So in a single site school, some things make the transformation process easier and some things make it more difficult. Now, what would you say are some of the major differences in the process? I'm assuming the guiding principles are pretty much the same, but what about the sequential activities and the continuous activities?
Your building principal or your governing body at that single site school needs to be totally bought in and ready to lead kind of all functions of this work, where in a district, you're working with multiple district leaders that are owning different components of this work. And so I always say that transformation at a single site school is literally on the shoulders of that building leader, and making sure that that building leader is ready to be a generalist in all areas of those system change guiding principles, ready to set them, obviously, co-design them with their building and with their teams and with their stakeholders in their community, but then essentially has to be the owner of a lot of sequential activities and a lot of responsibilities for implementation. So in those single sites, we're always looking for emerging leaders and emerging trailblazers, and making sure that that leadership in the transformation process is not just on the shoulders of a principal, obviously for sustainability purposes, to make sure that that work can continue to live on through other leaders, but really an opportunity for other folks to really rise up in their own leadership and to build kind of a bursting leadership pipeline throughout the transformation process.
So the principal plays a huge role compared to anyone else in a school district. And what style of leadership do you find most effective for the school leaders to use?
Yeah, so style of leadership for school leaders is a shared leadership mindset with openness to feedback, openness to collect and influence at the same time, receive feedback and influence at the same time. We have struggled mostly with, school leaders that want a very top-down approach, that have, a one right way approach to wanting to lead a system or a school. And so sometimes we have to coach through that, and we have to get leaders to kind of open their eyes to what they're experiencing or what they're modeling for their teams. But those leaders that are open to shared leadership, delegating, and allowing folks to really thrive and drive are the most successful.
Scott, this is so insightful. You have a lot of experience helping schools to transform successfully. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Now let's hear from Jeff Wetzler, co-founder and board member of Transcend Education, a nonprofit organization that operates nationally to help schools and districts transform to the personalized, competency-based paradigm of education. Jeff, have you worked with any individual schools that are not part of a school district and not controlled by a charter organization or such?
Yeah, we have worked with single-site charter schools, and we've also worked with independent schools as well.
What are the differences between how you approach the change process with individual schools versus an entire school district?
Well, I think the main difference is that you don't have that extra district layer, because they have the decision, in a typical district situation, there's decisions that live at the district level, and there's decisions that live at the school level. And then there's relationships between the two, and you've got to tend to all of that. When you're working with a single site school, the leadership of that school often holds all those decisions. And so it can reduce the complexity and can allow them to move a little faster. They obviously still have all the same stakeholders in terms of students and families and educators and so on. So that doesn't go away, but the layers become simpler.
Would you say the guiding principles are mostly the same?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that roughly the guiding principles still apply across those situations.
Thank you, Scott and Jeff, for helping us understand how standalone schools can move toward personalized, competency-based learning. Before we end this chapter, listen closely for a special offer. Listeners of this podcast receive 20% off Dr. Reigeluth's book, Vision and Action, with the exclusive code VA20 when you order directly from solutiontree.com. This offer is only available for a limited time. Visit solutiontree.com to order your copy today. We are deeply grateful to everyone supporting our GoFundMe campaign, including Roberto Joseph, Fred O'Neill, Unak Beck, and Nari Kem. The campaign is called Help End America's Education Crisis Now, and the link is in the show notes. Your generous contributions make it possible for us to keep this podcast available to all. Thanks so much to Dr. Reigeluth, Scott Fronheim from Leap Innovations, and Jeff Wetzler from Transcend Education. That's it for Chapter 9 of The Education Crisis, what it is and how to fix it. I'm Tembi Duncan, and remember, the future of education is in our hands.